This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
Who's that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You're crazy! Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 180 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter page. That is correct. It is Liam. Liam, welcome to the DCAU Review episode 180.
That is right. We are still smack dab in the middle of this month of October. We are doing Batman the Animated Series reviews this month. And man, the hits just keep on coming. We had a big episode last week with Harley and Ivy, and we've got an arguably even bigger one this week with the official introduction of Batgirl in Shadow of the Bat, parts 1 and 2.
Parts 1 and 2. That's right. We have a lot to discuss on this one. Liam, as we mentioned last week, this one was somewhat familiar to us only because we had this one on one of the Warner Brothers official home video releases. This was the Two-Face tape, videotape that contained just these 2 episodes. So near and dear to us. I think this may be one of the episodes that we've probably seen most in our lives, but near and dear for other reasons as we'll get into the episode today. But very excited to chat about this episode with you. I'm sure you have lots of fond memories of this one going into it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Just for the reasons you mentioned, it's definitely one that I've seen, these 2-part episodes. This is definitely 2 of the ones I've seen the most of any of these episodes growing up, and even into my young adulthood once DVDs and streaming became a thing. This is one I would revisit quite a bit. So yeah, there's a lot to get into here, and a lot of happy memories associated with this episode. And as we often do, especially with the Batman episodes, it's always a fun time to see how well your modern, more critical eye holds up against that nostalgic feeling when the music hits, or when the title card comes up, or whatever the theme song plays, whatever it is that we'll certainly get into throughout our reviews here in our 4 main categories. But always fun to have one of those really true nostalgic feelings when you open up an episode, and we definitely both have that for these 2 episodes.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out in our scores today, whether or not that will be a detriment or a benefit. But we might as well jump in because I know we have a lot to talk about with 2 episodes being reviewed today. So let's get into it. Before we do, of course, you have the official Imdb synopsis for this week's episode, which episodes, which means, of course, that means, Liam, you get 2 Imdb synopses to repeat this week. So very excited about that. And these episodes actually premiered on the Fox Kids. I almost said Kids WB, not quite. The Fox Kids network on an afternoon of September the 13th and then September the 14th, 1993, putting us at the 28-year anniversary of these episodes just past last month.
That's right. And since this is a 2-part episode, Cal, that means I, of course, have 2 synopses to read. And we'll see how each one holds up here. This is, of course, for the episodes Shadow of the Bat parts 1 and 2. Both were written by Brian Stevens, both parts directed by Frank Parr, with music for part 1 by the great Shirley Walker and music for part 2 by Harvey Cohen. animation by Dong Yang with layouts by Spectrum. And those synopses read as such. Commissioner James Gordon is arrested for corruption, forcing his daughter Barbara Gordon to take a dramatic step to help him. That's part one. And part two, Barbara Gordon, now Batgirl, joins Batman and Robin's investigation of Commissioner Gordon's framing.
Those aren't the best. I'm not going to lie. They're okay. They just did not spend a lot of time in kind of covering the plot, which is okay. We can do that. But I guess they covered the basics there, Liam, as we get into the episode here. At the very beginning, we have this very fun scene that we have Rupert Thorne joining his men in what is looks like the trafficking of some contraband at the docks that is interrupted by the GCPD. They are busted, and Thorne has to do his best to make an escape so that he is not seen and connected. And a plot point I think probably lost on me as a child watching this episode, that the reason why he couldn't be seen is because he's keeping, he didn't want to be associated and be held by the police in connection with this. He's a criminal, but he's an underhanded, like under the table criminal. So it's not something that he's out and about. So I think that the subtlety of the reason why he didn't want to be seen was lost on me as a child. But you very much pick up on things as an adult watching these that you may have missed as a child. So him trying to escape, Batman foils him quickly thereafter, and we actually are introduced to this brand new character that is a part of the contraband bust here at the docks. A new member of the GCPD and assistant commissioner, that being this new character, Gil Mason.
Careful, Gil.
Don't make this hard on yourself, Thorne. Step out where we can see you.
Not even if I could, Flatfoot. Look! Don't you just love it when he gives them to you gift wrap?
The Deputy Commissioner, Gil Mason, who last night was instrumental in capturing Rupert Thorne.
Mason attributed the incriminating evidence against Thorne to a mysterious informant.
And the Commissioner and I won't rest until every crime kingpin, hustler, and two-bit crook is off the streets.
You'll ruin your eyes changing channels so fast, Master Bruce. Not to mention your attention span. One would think the fall of Rupert Thorne would bring a smile even to your face.
I'd love to know who this mysterious informant is. This is the third gang lord Mason's brought down in as many months.
Yes, it's quite alarming. If this continues, you might even be forced into taking a vacation.
Liam, I think there's tends to be a bad record when it comes to introducing a brand new character that you've never heard of before into a cartoon. You can pretty much guarantee that guy, A, isn't going to last long, and B, probably isn't going to be on the right side of things.
Yeah, that generally tends to be a thing when you have a sort of special guest star like this. He's either going to be, as you said, sort of immediately put out of commission in some ways, or is going to maybe turn out to be working for the other side, and that will obviously we'll get to that later in the episode. But yes, they make note as Bruce Wayne is watching the news after the drug bust that Gil Mason, this assistant commissioner, as well as Gordon, have been just raining down fire and brimstone on the mob, and this is the third mob boss that they've taken down in recent times. And Bruce is sort of pondering how exactly it is that they're getting all these tips, who could be tipping the police off to all this. It feels like something of a setup for and that perhaps a new player is moving into town and is sort of cleaning up the competition before moving in. And that's I think part of this that I didn't quite remember or maybe quite pick up on as a kid, is the two-pronged attack from our main villain, who of course we find out later is Two-Face, which is that there's a plot at play here to not only take control of the underworld, but also to sort of control the people that would be coming after them in law enforcement. And But we'll get to that more in a moment. But yes, as Bruce sort of continues to ponder that, we are reintroduced to Barbara Gordon, and there's sort of an established thing here, and we'll get into this as you kind of touched on it, Cal, which is that this character of Gil Mason, which is introduced for this episode and then never seen again after part 2, it kind of feels like a little bit of a waste, because this series was very often very good at bringing in characters early on, and then when they became the more iconic version of themselves, in the case of a Batgirl, in this very episode, we had seen Barbara Gordon multiple times, and we had seen her, not only her physical abilities in the field in Heart of Steel, where she infiltrates Rossum's factory, but also in I Am the Night, we see her sort of motivation when her father is put in danger, is nearly killed. And it doesn't appear that Batman is going to step up to solve the case. We once again sort of see that fire building in her, similar to the way that we were introduced to Harvey Dent multiple times before
Absolutely.
he becomes Two-Face. So I do think that is maybe, and we'll get into that maybe more when we're talking our broad strokes and our scores, but that is maybe one thing that stuck out to me on a rewatch, is like, well, of course, this pretty boy hero cop that happens to be taking down all the mobs seemingly almost single-handedly, of course this guy was going to turn out to be crooked, and maybe if we had introduced Gil a couple episodes earlier in the series and then worked up to this, it wouldn't have seemed like such an obvious thing.
Yeah, I agree, especially when you, like you said, when you contrast it against the Barbara Gordon character, or you contrast it against Harvey Dent, who made several appearances, both who've made several appearances beforehand. It does feel like, as an adult watching this, even knowing how this episode goes, if you hadn't seen this episode, you're kind of tipped off right away that this guy is probably going to have something to do with what's going on, which we immediately, your spidey sense should be tingling when he's the one that shows up to arrest Jim Gordon. As we continue through the plot here, that it turns out he shows up that evening at Jim's house, or shortly thereafter, busting Thorne, and he has a warrant for Jim Gordon's arrest.
Mr. Mason, you must be psychic. We were just talking about you. Come in.
Hey, Gil, what's doing?
Another tip on a case?
Believe me, Jim, I don't want to be here, but I thought it would be best coming from me.
What is it? What's wrong?
James Gordon, I have a warrant for your arrest.
This is a joke, right?
On what charges?
Accepting bribes.
You can't be serious.
The department has reason to believe that you've been taking money from Rupert Thorne for years.
What? Dad's never taken a bribe in his life.
I'm sorry, Barb. You have the right to remain silent. If you give up that right, anything you say...
I know my rights, Gil.
Dad!
Don't worry, Barbara. It's all a mistake. You'll see.
Commissioner, do you have a statement? What about this? I'm sorry, Barbara. I really am.
Commissioner Gordon, just a statement, sir. What about these corruption charges against you, sir? Is there anything you have to say? Please. Mr. Gordon,
This warrant proceeds to say that Jim has taken bribes for years and is almost business partners pretty much with Rupert Thorne, and that he's connected to him, and which of course I think, again, something else lost on me as a child, Jim Gordon being the good cop of maybe a handful of good cops in a very corrupt city. This would be extremely detrimental, not only to the city itself, but obviously Jim Gordon's reputation would be completely ruined. And then naturally people in the city would be looking for somebody that is squeaky clean and that would look to fill his shoes in a way that they could once again trust. So why wouldn't you then look to this squeaky clean, good looking, young, up and coming member of the police department to then slide right into the commissioner's chair, which ultimately we learn is part of Two-Face's plan. So that this plot to frame Gordon and to make him look like he's been on Thorne's payroll and taking bribes for years is pretty intricate, and we again reveal is a huge part of the plan. Of course, Gil has to keep up appearances though, and after Harvey Bullock has a conversation with Barbara, trying to keep her somewhat her spirits up a little bit, mentions that there's going to be a rally that they're going to put on in honor of Commissioner Gordon, because he's also been denied bail by the district attorney, who we also will see later on in some episodes, the new district attorney that's replaced Harvey Dent, obviously. She comes back into play in a rather memorable episode later on, but they've denied Gordon bail. So there's rally that they're going to throw that apparently was Gil Mason's idea, to throw support behind Gordon, to take the heat off of him as somebody that could potentially be behind this, obviously, and also to allow him to kind of continue to get his face out there in the public, for them to be a potential face in the future for the GCPD. So in the process of this, Barbara decides that she thinks that Batman needs to come and show up. And wouldn't you know it, Gordon, who's in prison, asks Batman to go visit Barbara, just to ask her to keep her nose out of it. And that's kind of where we get the next tension here that ultimately leads to Barbara taking things into her own hands.
But you have to come to the rally. The public respects you. If they see you there, they'll know Dad's innocent.
Sorry, but there's more to this than a simple frame-up. And I'm not going to find out by appearing at rallies.
But don't you see?
The best thing you can do for him is to keep out of it. The people behind this are dangerous.
I'm a professional. Don't try this at home, huh? Sorry, Batman. You being at the rally could decide if Dad goes free. So you'll be there, one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's another great sequence, I think, of kind of building on what we saw in the I Am the Night episode, where it's clear that when Barbara thinks that Batman isn't going to take action, that she clearly has that motivation, and it's satiated in that episode when Batman sort of comes back at the end. But here in this episode, she really feels that the only way that Gordon is going to get bail is if Batman is seen there, and so she goes and makes herself sort of a makeshift suit, complete with bulky shoulder pads and everything. And there's sort of that's right. Yeah, there's a kind of a fun sequence there, but and this is sort of offset by Bruce deciding he's not going to do that and is instead going to go undercover as one of his more famous underworld alter egos when he's going undercover, that being, of course, Matches Malone. And in the meantime, he actually asks Robin, who just kind of shows up in this episode, and asks him to make the public appearance on Batman's behalf for him. And of course, so as Robin is preparing to kind of make his big grand entrance onto the scene during this rally, we see this fake Batman, Barbara in the suit, swing by, and then as sort of there's some commotion there as the crowd reacts to seemingly seeing Batman profess Gordon's innocence, that we get a couple of masked thugs, complete with Tommy gun, looking to apparently make a drive-by on Gil Mason, who was standing at the podium making a rousing speech in favor of Jim Gordon's innocence. And that actually causes, I guess, the fight or flight moment for Barbara here, as she springs into action and actually is sort of in her own clumsy way is able to crash the thug's car, and then she and Robin are able to kind of chase the thugs off, though they do both get away from her and Robin, and they're sort of left not knowing where to go next, except for the fact, of course, that Barbara was able to unmask one of the thugs. And so that sort of sets up our final act of part one, as Barbara goes to police headquarters to try to identify the perp, and she's able to do that. Meanwhile, we see Dick Grayson and Alfred back at Wayne Manor, and Dick is watching footage of the shootout that was captured by Summer Gleason, and in addition to footage of Batgirl being seen, we also noticed something pretty suspicious. That being that, as Alfred and Dick put it, Mr. Mason ducked before the guns started firing.
All Gotham is talking about the mysterious Batgirl who foiled an assassination attempt on acting Commissioner Gil Mason.
Expanding membership in the crime-fighting club?
If I find out who she is, I'll... Hey, look at that.
Mr. Mason ducked before he saw the guns.
Almost as though he expected it.
And so Dick is sort of seemingly getting on to the right track here. That's a plot point I actually like in this episode that I don't really remember us getting to see very much in the rest of this series, which is we get to see Robin be a little bit of a detective. Like everybody in this episode kind of comes to these conclusions on their own. Obviously, Bruce is undercover and is following one of these thugs, and meanwhile, Barbara is able to figure it out by having seen the man's face and then matches him to a mugshot in a book on Harvey Bullock's desk, and then Dick is able to kind of figure it out through this news report that he keeps watching. So it's kind of fun to see all three of our heroes here come to the same conclusion, sort of independently of each other, and kind of figure out that something's going wrong. And that sets up sort of the end of part one as Barbara goes to Gil's house, ready to tell him that she knows who one of the men who shot at him was. Wouldn't you know it, that exact person is sitting on Gil's couch at that moment.
Yep, we get old Mad Dog, which he has a very distinctive face, very much looking like a beaver with his giant buck teeth. But and that's kind of where we wrap up part one, because Barbara realizes at that point that Gil is not somebody that she can trust. She doesn't really have a lot of trust for anybody else. Batman has told her to sit this one out, but she looks over as she's talking to her teddy bear Whoopi, who makes his reappearance. Whoopi always there to encourage Barbara to do things against what Batman has advised her to do. Mind you, as you remember from Heart of Steel, Whoopi also advised her to go save Commissioner Gordon as well, if you recall.
Can you imagine like she can hear Whoopi talking? Like is Barbara a little schizophrenic in this universe?
Yeah, maybe. We're not sure, but either way, that's kind of where we wrap part one here. So I think for plot for part one, we're going to give this a single score, of course, but I love the plot for this episode. I mean, I think both parts together, it works really well, but in a vacuum, this first part, there's so much that goes on, and I think it's so well put together. I think the pacing is done really well. You have the opening scene that sort of sets the table and does its best to introduce you to this new character, Gil. It also sets up ultimately what's going to be this plot, because Two-Face's plot is revealed to be, as you mentioned, he's moving out all the other gangs, attempting to kind of make it seem like there's a new gang moving in, but ultimately he's kind of been laying low since the end of Two-Face part two, and he's sort of been amassing this power and attempting to infiltrate the Gotham City Police Department, obviously with placing Mason and putting Mason under his influence. So you really see this plot point coming together here, and it's a lot that's set up. You have Bruce going undercover, and Bruce is actually, as he's trying to infiltrate Two-Face's his hideout, is unfortunately knocked unconscious by Two-Face and sort of discovered there. So his story is kind of left hanging. As you mentioned, we have Robin doing the detective work side of things, and him having an interaction with Batgirl, during this attempted assassination. So he's on to trying to figure out who she is also, and she's actually exposed sort of the public while this happens. Summer Gleason is able to get footage of her kind of fighting off the various thugs. So we get, she's out there in the public now. So there's a lot that's set up in this episode for them, and it's paced really well. I don't think it feels really jam-packed. I feel like the plot for this episode is so strong, and the beats just kind of go all together, setting us up for this second part that we come to.
Yeah, it's like an all-timer, I think, of a setup of a part one episode here. It's especially, and we'll certainly get to that maybe in visuals and even in voice acting later, but that final moment, the very final moment after, as you said, Bruce has been captured as Matches Malone and is seemingly about to be put to death. And we cut to the Batgirl, and we get the first reveal of the Batgirl suit, the true Batgirl suit, in the final shot of the episode, and that's sort of a really great cliffhanger. Is that we do see her suit up right as the episode ends, so we know that there's a very exciting conclusion coming in the next part. And that kind of brings us into to part two, as we pick up pretty much right where we left off with Robin going and sort of keeping an eye on Gil Mason and Batgirl arriving at the same time. They actually have like a brief scuffle, and Robin's sort of very dismissive of her and tells her that he doesn't have time to look after amateurs, and in the meantime he's able to plant a bug on Gil Mason's balcony, and
you get this weird bat listening device used twice in this
but they're like a little bit different, because the one's like a blue one that's also maybe an earpiece. And then this one is just like a big gray thing with a speaker on it, so I don't know, maybe there's one for that's like the two-way radio one, and then there's one that's just the listening device. I don't know.
Makes sense. I like that.
But so we get two different bat listening devices in this episode. But so Robin hears an address that he's going to go to this old abandoned subway station, and in the meanwhile, Barbara, again showing herself to be quite capable as well, is able to pull out a pair of binoculars and see that Mason has written the address down. And so they're both sort of seemingly going their separate ways, with Barbara claiming that since Robin won't let her help, that she'll just head on home. And then, of course, she instead springs into action, which is sort of when we finally get our three heroes all convening, as we find out that Two-Face has brought Mason down there to try to identify this mysterious Matches Malone. And in the meantime, Robin has arrived and begun to sort of take out some of Two-Face's thugs and sort of tying them up. And as Batgirl arrives, she is unfortunately sort of tripped up by one of the thugs, kind of again getting over the fact that she is still very inexperienced at this crime fighting thing. And despite her being a good athlete and smart and capable, she's not completely Teflon yet when it comes to the finer points of crime fighting. And
once Gordon's out of the picture, you'll be a shoo-in to take his place. In fact, they could be calling you commissioner by tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
I'm stepping up the timetable. Too many people nosing around. This guy, that Batgirl Chippy. I'm not taking any chances. My men will bust Gordon out of jail tonight. Then we'll dump him off Bayshore Ward.
Hey, what's that? Hey, did you hear something?
We got company. Over there. Robin, look out!
She sort of stumbles into Robin, who drops a smoke bomb, and that allows Batman to get away, or at least to avoid getting shot. But it also creates sort of this crazy melee where Two-Face and Mason and some of the other thugs are able to get away and also blow up the only exit to the place, which sort of leaves our heroes trapped as Batman finally suits up for the second part here.
Yeah, and we're in an abandoned subway station, it looks like, at this point, something that was under construction. So As Two-Face blows up the exit, he also, the first time ever, I think that a villain is smart enough. He says, I think the explosion probably got them, but just in case, he decides to flood the tunnels also. Previously placed explosives that he explodes. So this is an example of, hey, I'm all for this supervillain figuring out that, hey, maybe just in case my plan didn't work because this Batman is really resourceful and tends not to be easy to kill, let me follow up with that just in case. So I really appreciated that.
Right. It's not the classic like James Bond villain where you set the death trap up and then walk out of the room and just assume that he's dead. You know, he at least tried to have like a double,
right?
A secondary is like, well, if the bomb didn't get him, maybe the water will. So
exactly. Yeah, I appreciated that. But so as he floods the tunnels, Batman, Robin, and Batgirl suddenly hear the rushing waves, and Batman uses his last and only bat grapple at this point to blast a hole in the ceiling. That comes down. Robin uses his last bat grapple to shoot the grapple up and allow Batgirl to escape. As she's lowering the grapple back down to them, however, they are washed away by an oncoming set of, I guess, sewer water, sewage, raw sewage.
Pretty blue for sewer water, I would think.
River water, I guess. I don't know.
I guess it's probably coming in from everywhere, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
There's definitely poop in that water somewhere.
Yeah. Or dead bodies, one or the other.
Dead bodies, rats. You know, all of the stuff you would expect to find in the subways of Gotham City. I'm sure.
Right, exactly. So they're washed away, much to Batgirl's chagrin. In this meantime, however, we flash back to GCPD, where they finally allowed Commissioner Gordon to change out of his brown pants and button-down shirt while he's being held in a cell there. And he is broken out by a pair of thugs who mention that Rupert Thorne is taking care of him and that he doesn't forget his friends, further trying to cement that Gordon is certainly not on the up and up. And that leads to Barbara attempting to make a call to the police department to warn them, but it's too late. And she finds out that he at that point has been taken. And so we end up down by the docks. And that's where Gil Mason has arrived with Two-Face and his thugs, and they're going to put an end to Gordon the old-fashioned way with a bullet to the head, and I guess throw his body in the river. But just in time, Batgirl shows up and is able to foil the plot and stop Gordon from being killed. And just as it looks like that Two-Face's thugs with their Tommy guns once again are about to overtake her, wouldn't you know it, the Dark Knight and the Boy Wonder, who managed to escape the abandoned subway and I don't know the physics of this and how likely this will work. But just one of the coolest bits that I think that I can remember, and one of my childhood favorites, where they're literally in a subway car underwater driving through the tunnel, and they burst through the wall as the tunnels continue to be filled with water. So it allows them to escape, and Batman has to use his ingenuity. As we mentioned, no more bat grapples left in the utility belt. So he uses a rope and breaks a handle off the side of the subway to use it as a rappelling rope. So lots of Batman ingenuity there. They also have heard that they were going to take Gordon to the docks. So they are meeting there. There's this convergence, and the Dark Knight and the Boy Wonder aid in foiling Two-Face and his thugs. But Gil Mason jumps in a boat and heads out into the river, where we see the old Statue of Liberty again. And as he's headed off, Barbara runs and jumps onto the back of the boat, and we kind of get the culmination of her storyline here, and ultimately giving comeuppance to the guy that essentially tried to oust her father.
Yeah, it really moves at a clip, I think, this part too, as a whole, because we go right from Batgirl and Robin convening on the subway to that first sort of action beat to the subway scene. And then, this final fight where they're saving Gordon and Batman and Robin are taking down the thugs and Two-Face. And then, it really does go back to kind of, I guess, where we started, which is this is really a story about Batgirl and her, her confronting this guy that tried to not only take her father's job, ruin his reputation, but ultimately was willing to kill him in order to tie up any loose ends. And so yeah, she's sort of on her own, and they have sort of this brief scuffle where he actually unmasks her and realizes that it's Barbara. And this is, I don't know if we had mentioned this plot point. It's just sort of briefly mentioned, but it's mentioned at the start of part one that Jim Gordon mentions that he had noticed that Barbara and Gil had seemingly hit it off really well at a fundraiser that they had all been attending to. So there's, I guess the implication there is that if Gil was able to pull this off and Barbara had not known, that he would have tried to then sort of also begin a romantic relationship with her. And so there's like a little bit of a payoff in that, as well as obviously she knows that he is, nothing but scum, and is able to fight him off. And
now let's see who you really are. Barbara? I didn't know it was you.
Would it have made a difference, Gil? I ought to leave you here.
she gives him, it must have been quite a kick, because she kicks him, he's knocked unconscious, she saves him, the boat is speeding towards the base of this Statue of Liberty in Gotham Harbor, and she pulls him out to safety. But it's noted that Mr. Mason is in a coma in our little epilogue sequence here, and he is, as we said, never heard from again. So I guess he died.
Well, we know that he didn't wake up, because Barbara's secret that we know of was never exposed, unless we get some sort of payoff to this storyline in a future tie-in comic or something. But yeah, a hell of a kick to the head, I guess. That and he does bang it pretty hard on the side of the boat. So
I suppose, but that sets up our final little sequence. We have this nice little press conference as the reporters, who, by the way, were all too willing to believe that this new young pretty boy was legitimate, and that Gordon was fully on the take. But they're now being quite nice to Commissioner Gordon, and they're sort of just asking him how does it feel to be out, to have his name cleared and all that. And they kind of have this nice moment. And then he is, of course, asked about Batgirl, and he says that, as far as he's concerned, she's as welcome in this city as the Batman. And we get a nice, very classic, something you could have seen in the George Reeves Superman show, or perhaps the Fleischer shorts, where Bruce, Dick, and Barbara are sort of all out musing out loud about how we bet we haven't seen the last of this Batgirl character. And we get Barbara and Jim sort of sharing an embrace, and we have this nice pan up to the lady holding the scales of justice, as everything is back to normal, and we've sort of had order restored, and that's where we leave it. So as we get into our scores here, man, this is so much fun. This is such a fun 2 parts. Like we said, I think part 1, if we're picking which part is better, I would probably give it to part 1.
Agreed.
But the part 2 definitely has, I think, maybe more memorable stuff in the visual department, I would say, than the story department. Maybe, like, it is convenient. Like, we have to kind of cram all of the villains and heroes into one location. So it's like the idea that he would bring the deputy commissioner down to an abandoned subway and risk him potentially being seen with Two-Face just to try to identify this random guy. I guess the idea is they think maybe he's an undercover cop or something. So they do try to justify it, and they even sort of point that out as Mason is sort of really upset with Harvey at one point, and is yelling at him, how you dragged me out here in the middle of the night just to try to identify some thug or something. But so it is a little, like, it gets a little convenient. I feel like maybe they kind of force, and then the quick stage breakout of Gordon. Maybe you could have put that at the end of part 1 or something to space that out as well a little bit. But all that being said, I still think this is a great deal of fun. And I actually gave plot a pretty strong 8 out of 10.
Nice. I love this episode. I found almost no faults with, I think I found 0 faults with part 1. I think everything from Barbara, being desperate to get Batman to show up to this rally to show that her dad is innocent and having to take that into her own hands as a way to sort of explain this origin of Batgirl makes a lot of sense. As far as your classic origins of Batgirl, this, it's usually just, she's a big fan of Batman, so she's going to take up crime fighting one day. This one makes a little bit more sense. She has a purpose for dressing up like Batgirl or like Batman. She never intended to become a superhero, but then is faced with this conundrum of, well, what do I do? Because I don't feel like there's anything that I can do at this point. So I have to kind of take matters into my own hands. And why not? Why can't I do it? She's obviously an athlete, and she feels like between that and maybe the minor success that she has in that brief foiling of the bad guys, that she can kind of do this. So obviously that's, as you mentioned, the plot point of her not quite being ready for prime time, where she's stumbling over herself, and she's clumsy and taken by surprise when the goon kind of throws her off of him after she unmasks him and throws her into the garbage. There's a lot of that I love. Part 2, I think it's maybe more nostalgia goggles for me, just because of the plot with them in the subway station is so fun. I will say it's almost as if they intended to extend the Thorn storyline a little bit. Maybe there was a part that was cut out, because the fact that the thugs mentioned Thorn right there as sort of this red herring to keep Gordon in the that this narrative of him being on the payroll alive. I wonder if that was cut and spliced from another, an earlier part of the episode, and they kind of moved the plot around or whatever, because it really, at that point, other than, I guess it does explain why he would be broken out of jail, but it's really not followed up on, other than there's this scene where Harvey Bullock has this frustrating turn with being asked questions by the media members, attempting to ask him if he thinks Gordon is guilty. It's never really followed up again. It's not as if Harvey has to deal with this, maybe Gordon was on the take. Maybe this wasn't all a setup by Two-Face or Gil Mason. So it would have been interesting to see that play later on. With that said, though, I think looking at this episode as one whole piece, I love it so much. I think I smiled from the beginning of the episode to the end of it. I ended up giving plot a perfect 10 out of 10.
Oh, wow. Love it. Yeah, like I said, I think some of my critiques are maybe minor nitpicks. Like I said, that the convenience of that last part, and maybe that I just wish that they had been able to introduce this Mason character a couple episodes beforehand, at least one episode beforehand, just so maybe you would not have such an obvious suspect as to who would be responsible for the framing of Gordon. But overall, 2 very strong scores from both of us, and yeah, this is one that definitely holds up really well, and it's a great this if you look at that as sort of the three Barbara episodes leading up to her fully embracing this role of Batgirl, I think that's a great, this works as like a great crescendo to that. And obviously she comes back later on in one of the final episodes of this original run, as well as in the new Batman Adventures and beyond, but still this works, I think, as a great companion piece to some of her earlier appearances in the series, and feels like a fitting reason why this would be the time she finally suits up and everything. So yeah, it all works together really well.
Absolutely. Moving on, Liam, we'll talk about our visual and animation here. I believe you said Coco Dong Yang again involved in this one, but then
Dong Yang and Spectrum, actually.
Spectrum's not one that I remember hearing very often, if I'm not mistaken.
So they're one of the ones that I think worked in tandem with TMS. So their name isn't always on I think the episode. I think they were sometimes doing not necessarily uncredited work, but they would be sort of the assisting some of the other studios, like in this case, assisting Dong Yang. Some of the Spectrum episodes include like On Leather Wings, and they've got some good ones under their belts as far as their sort of solo episodes. But they often also worked in tandem with TMS and some of the other studios as well.
I think, On Leather Wings, I think, was one of the episodes that visually it's hard to deny just the beauty of that. And I think it makes sense then that this group worked on this episode too, because man, I think from start to finish, this thing is beautiful. The characters are all moving so smoothly. Everybody looks incredibly on model. We don't have we got Batman with the square jaw and not the real droopy nose and long ears on some of those episodes, which we've talked about. Mm-hmm. As long as it's consistent in the episode, it really doesn't matter which one is which. But for me, the more true to the Bruce Timm original style, that square jaw, this thing looked like in parts, and I checked the credits and he wasn't listed, but it looked to me like there was several bits that were storyboarded by Bruce Timm himself, especially in part 2. A lot of the Batgirl reactions, a lot of the sort of the facial reactions that she has, and her smiling and her looking surprised when she sees Batman and Robin showing up again. I thought, man, this looks just like a storyboard done by Bruce Timm, but he didn't get name credit, so maybe it was Butch Lukic or one of the other storyboard artists credited for this week's episode. But regardless, man, I have a lot of stuff to talk about with visuals, but I'll allow you to go first. What did you think overall of the episode, and what were your highlights?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty stunning episode from start to finish. I think that opening sequence with Thorn is a lot of fun, and even though the rest of the episode there's not a lot of shadows and sneaking around so much. I mean, we get a little bit of that in the start of part 2 with when Robin and Batgirl are kind of trying to quietly get into the subway station, but for the most part, but that opening sequence where they're in this dark warehouse, and Thorn walks sort of dramatically out of the shadows, and then he's running up to the roof, and they really do an interesting thing, which they would do occasionally on this show, and obviously have done in other mediums as well, which is they really give you that sense of like how terrifying Batman can be for a criminal. And
absolutely,
so when Thorn's on that roof, and at first you don't even see him, you just kind of hear the swooping, and then you see kind of the bat-eared shadow on Thorn, and then he looks, and you finally see what he's looking at, and you see the silhouette of Batman, the sort of steam coming off some of the vents in there, and we see Thorn kind of blindly firing into that steam, and then Batman swoops away, and then again we sort of don't see it, and then we see Thorn sort of look up very dramatically, and we see Batman sort of descend on him, and then we cut to the cops and Mason busting in, and we see Thorn all strung up. So I think that opening scene is a great, even though it's only a minute or so long, probably that in and of itself would make like a great Batman short for for something, and it is a pretty fun little sequence. And then you have the standout action beats of part 1 certainly as Batgirl springs into action in her sort of makeshift suit at first, as she makes her appearance for the rally, and then as she's going away, they kind of, even though I think most people would probably have figured it out pretty quickly, even as kids, they still kind of keep her in silhouette, and you're not quite sure who it is, and we don't get a close-up of her face right away until, and we see her sort of all in silhouette as she descends off a building, and then sort of as she's covered in the cape, turns around, and we finally see, Barbara's face under the cowl. And then even though I think it's kind of silly to have sort of an in-universe reason why her hair is sticking out of the back of the cowl, I think is pretty cute.
Agreed.
Like the idea that, you know, Robin just kind of sees this strange woman running away from him in a bat suit, and, you know, tries to grab her by the back of the cowl or perhaps the top of the cape, and she just keeps running, and it kind of tears away, and then the hair is revealed there. And then that sequence as the you know, she jumps up as the thugs in the car are coming back around for sort of another pass, and, you know, she does this sort of dramatic handspring and jumps up and grabs the banner from the rally and pulls it down onto the car. And we kind of almost have this one continuous shot as we follow the car, and then we go inside the car, and we have the POV shot as we sort of see just the white of the banner sort of covering everything, and then the banner finally slips off, and we see that the car is kind of heading straight into a fire hydrant and a brick wall. So yeah, I think that first episode, even though it isn't certainly as action heavy as the first one, there's still some fun sequences. And then, as mentioned, probably the number one thing from a design standpoint is, of course, the Batgirl suit itself. That being sort of revealed in part one, and then sort of you know, fully fleshed out as a visual look in part two. It's seems to sort of be based on a sort of later 1960s look, but, you know, not dissimilarly from the Batman suit itself, which wasn't all that dissimilar from the Batman suit in the comics at the time. They just sort of darkened the palette. It's a much darker gray, and then she has a much darker blue on her cape and cowl and gloves and everything. So I love this Batgirl design. I think I might prefer it to the black and yellow suit. That's sort of the standard go-to Batgirl suit. But I love that. I love that Batgirl design, and I think that's such a great dramatic ending to that first part. As again, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more in voice acting in a moment, but as we see her sort of grabbing some supplies, and she's all in shadow, and then she sort of steps out of the shadows. You know, not you know, the episode's called Shadow of the Bat. It's a really cool moment, and she kind of does the hero pose as the suit's revealed for the first time. There's just some really great stuff top to bottom.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think while we're talking about the suit, I'll say that that's my only nitpick, and the only thing I think that really brought the score down a little bit for me for this episode is the suit that we get revealed at the end of part one is not the suit that we get as she's out and about fighting crime in part two. And you'll notice that the highlights and the cell shading for the end of part one look very similar to the coloration of the actual Batman suit. Imagine the Batman, the animated series Batman suit minus the underwear on the outside, essentially. Look at this. Batgirl was setting trends way before new 52 heroes were, way back in 1993 here. Look at that. But so her cowl and her boots and her gloves are that sort of black with a blue cell shading in the middle of them at the end of part one. And then when we get her appearance in part two on the roof with Robin, it's blue with a sort of this black, not all that different than the Dick Sprang era Batman costume color, sort of with the black front of the cowl, and then with blue, bright blue gloves, bright blue back of the cowl, bright blue boots. So there is a bit of a change there, and it is a stark difference. So I'm interested to know kind of what happened between the two episodes, if there was some miscommunication maybe, or maybe after they saw the first episode completed, they decided that they wanted her to look unique enough to stand out in a scene that featured Batman, Robin, and Batgirl together. But clearly there was some sort of change that occurs, because she does not look the same after that. And so a little bit of weird continuity issues there between the two episodes, which is weird. It would be one thing if it was the follow-up episode, but these are back-to-back episodes. So in theory, it's moments after this suit is revealed to the viewer. It's then revealed again in the very next scene, and it's completely different. So yeah, that was my only poo-poo for this episode as far as visuals were concerned. I think going back, this also big episodes for turtlenecks in this episode. I don't know if you realize that. Bruce is sporting a turtleneck, like a bright red or reddish brown, I think, orange maybe turtleneck, and then Dick also sporting a lightly colored turtleneck in the scene that he's watching the television. Just big day for turtlenecks for here. For this, which actually, if you recall, Bruce Wayne loved the turtleneck in the live action Batman '89 also. So maybe just
there you go,
and a little nod to that with the turtlenecks going on here. But also, so there's a scene where Batman goes into an evidence room to attempt to look at the evidence that they have against Gordon, and he sneaks in and sneaks out being undetected, and then swings away from the GCPD. And there are these two cops that are walking out of the police department, both character models that you'll recognize. But what I loved about it is they hear the swooping of the cape, and in Gotham City at this point where Batman is clearly known, neither of them thought to look up. They just hear the swoop, look at each other, shrug, and keep walking. It's like these cops are so dumb. But yes, onto the highlights that I actually enjoyed. I think that sequence at the rally is maybe one of the best of the entire series. There's so much good that happens there, from them when Barbara shows up and you look to the roof and she puts the cape up, and obviously they drew it looking very much like Batman, and you have this mystery at this point. Who is this person? Even Dick jumps in and is like, who is this Bruce? What's going on? You're not sure who it is. And then as Barbara jumps down and sort of reveals herself, sort of celebrating the victory that she has there, we get these two headlights that pull out of this side street, and they light up Barbara kind of from the front. And then we get this really dramatic shot of these they look to be like still painted images. So the sort of painted drawn background almost, but they did this effect where they lit it up a little bit. They put this light effect over it every time a bullet left the gun. So it gives these static images this animated feel to it. And it's an absolutely gorgeous piece of artwork. They did that multiple times. They did that there, and then later on when the thugs get out and attempt to shoot Barbara themselves, there's a beautiful shot in that same scene. Also, there's this point, as we mentioned, where Summer Gleason picks up the video camera, and she sort of you see the reflection in the lens of these two thugs walking up to Barbara with their Tommy guns drawn as Summer Gleason is capturing this footage. Just such a cool, unique perspective to see the face of the person that's watching this, but you get to the visual of it in the lens of the camera sort of facing out. What a unique way to kind of reveal that what's going on behind her. I thought that was really, really fun and unique. And then that, I think that whole sequence is lots of fun also, because, obviously Dick and Barbara teaming up for the first time, taking down these thugs, splitting off. You get lots of stuff with that. I think as Bruce is climbing up the very next scene, climbing up the Two-Face's hideout, and you get a shot inside of the lair, and you see the security system set up there, giving the audience the clue that this is about to be a bad turn for Batman. I love that, because it's building the tension in that scene. You're like, no, Batman, stop, don't. And just as he lifts up the window and gets electrocuted, I thought that was great. And then later on, I think, as we mentioned, the scene that stands out in part 2 for me is the subway scene. The water in that scene is animated so smoothly and beautifully, and has that. I mean, it feels like water. It didn't feel like a 2D image. It gives it a very 3D effect. It's sort of rushing around them the entire time there. It's filling up this subway car that they're in. I just absolutely gorgeous. And then when they break through the wall, so the water comes spilling out. There's also sort of this spray that's coming out because the subway car is sort of blocking up the hole that it made in the wall. So that you get this spray of water that's coming out on top of the water that's pouring underneath of it. I thought that was really, really, really gorgeous. And I think the animation is so strong. I did chuckle also when Two-Face brought Gil down and they're sort of looking at Matches Malone. Two-Face asks him if he's an undercover cop, and Gil says, "Nah, I'd remember that face," which got me a chuckle, because obviously Bruce Wayne is a huge celebrity in the city of Gotham, and they can't pick it out that this is Bruce Wayne because of a little thin mustache that he has on his face. A very Clark Kent wears glasses type. type issue there. But that, and I think the final scene with Barbara on the boat really is a fun one. Also, the anticipation, the unmasking of her, and then her fighting back, and as we'll talk about in just a second, the music, I think throughout this, pairing with the visuals, just made everything really, really great. I felt like based on the visuals, I probably would have given it close to, if not a perfect score, if not for that little bit of inconsistency between the Batgirl suit. That's nitpicking, but again, it's what we do here. I ended up giving visuals an 8 out of 10, which is still really strong. What about you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I went 9 out of 10. I think there's a lot of fun stuff in part 2. We already talked about it quite a bit in plot, but the whole sequence with Batman and Robin escaping in the subway car underwater is such a tremendous scene, and just it feels very tense as the water's rushing in, and even at first as they're trying to sort of get up just into higher ground, and Robin is about to be washed away, and Batgirl's able to kind of throw a rope around his wrist, and she and Batman sort of work together to pull him out, and then as they're sort of washed away by the big tidal wave, and Batgirl's sort of frantically trying to pull the grapple up, and then realizes that there's nobody on the other end of it, and then that whole sequence with them in the subway is just so much fun, and that's such a great beat there. And then everything, there's a tremendous shot actually right as they're getting to the subway, as we see sort of one of Two-Face's thugs looking around, and there's a train goes by, and as the train finally passes, we just see Batgirl in all silhouette, and it spooks the thug, who's then grabbed by Robin and tied up really quickly. And it's funny that they didn't even know the other one was there, but we're both sort of working in tandem accidentally there. But that whole sequence is a lot of fun, and it's interesting. The demise of Two-Face in this episode for the second time in this series. He is crushed. He is undone by a giant coin, and in this face, like if you slow-mo that, by the way, his head is like, his skull is fractured. Like it's amazing he's alive. Like he is squished like a pancake for
maybe this is where we get the birth of the third personality trait here.
Yeah,
that shows up because his brain he has severe CTE after being smushed by the giant coin for the second time.
I love that as a nice bit of headcanon there. But that's a great fun sequence, and always a fun bit of irony of whenever the coin is of course always, in some way or another, a coin always has to be Two-Face's undoing in this series, and that is still the case in this episode here. So that's a lot of fun, and there's so much great stuff in this episode from both parts, and that is once again reflected in both of our very high scores.
Absolutely. And I will say also, I think the last thing I'll point out is after Two-Face's demise, and we learn that Barbara is on the boat after Gil, there's this really cool sequence where it's Robin, Commissioner Gordon, and Batman together standing there, and Robin asks Batman where Batgirl is, and it just sort of, he has this longing look sort of out towards the water and says she's out there on her own. And then we get the sort of the culmination here. So it's really cool that, again, the focal point of both of these episodes really is the origin of Batgirl, and she gets the spotlight for a large part of the episode, ultimately even the culmination of this episode. So I love that she wasn't made just kind of like the third wheel, which oftentimes, and it was probably a result of the period of time in which the show was done, but the Batgirl of the Batman 66 was often, sort of an afterthought or the third wheel on the Bat team. But, for her to kind of get her own sort of spotlight here in the series and kind of established as this very important character going forward, I really love that. So I thought that was a fitting little end to the episode.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, let's move on to music for this week, which, as you mentioned, the late, great Shirley Walker was responsible for, as well as Mr. Harvey Cohen as well, wrote some of the music for this week. Liam, lots, I think from the get-go, from the title card we get the Batgirl theme sort of coming in just a little bit. It's coming in very light. And then we get this whole scene done with Rupert Thorne. We then get music throughout that Thorne scene, as you mentioned, the reveal of Batman as he sort of stalks Thorne on this roof. And I think it continues through the next scene where Gordon gets arrested. And there's just so much good music in this episode. The composition is just phenomenal, and I think from start to finish, I mean, there are obviously times where the episode breathes a little bit and there's not music, but the music coming in when it needs to and sort of setting the tone for each scene, it's incredible. it's a home run, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, totally agree. I think the main theme of the episode, and that's sort of the refrain that's played every time sort of Batgirl is springing into action. It's also played at the sort of slowly as the title card is airing. And then one of the things I really love about the way that, and we talk about this all the time with the Batman theme and some of the other, classic hero and villain themes is when she's first sort of just tiptoeing into the action, when she just swings over the building, it's sort of brought in very lightly and slowly, and sort of with just sort of light strings as it's sort of revealed. And then when she actually is springing into action in that action sequence in part 1, when she jumps up to grab the banner, then the percussion comes in and it really starts to build and it gets faster paced, and you bring those horns in and it's played it's so big and heroic and triumphant at that moment, as she's now sort of fully embracing this role as a superhero, and we hear that brought back all throughout part 1. And there's sort of like an alternate theme played for her when she's out on the boat at the end, which I think is actually the theme that they end up using more for her going forward in this series and into the new Batman adventures, when it's sort of her out on the boat with Mason at the end of part 2. But without a doubt, that is going to be the standout thing. It's another one of those classic pieces. We talk about that when a certain character theme that you watch these 2 episodes, and I defy you to not just find yourself humming this for a week straight, probably afterwards.
Yeah, 100%. I think since you posted the clip, which you guys can check out on our social media at DCAU Review, both on Twitter and Instagram, but since you posted that earlier in the week, I think the Batgirl theme has been in my head. I was super excited to begin watching the episode. And as I said, not having seen this in several years, but having seen it so many times in my life, it picks up right away. And the fact that you get the sort of very slow build under the title card, and then again, it comes back in later on once Batgirl sort of makes her debut in that scene at the rally. And then, as you mentioned, the fact that there's this sort of alternate theme that they bring in that plays for the second part, it's almost, it reminds me of the fact that they ended up going with the Danny Elfman theme for Batman for the majority of it, but you also have the Shirley Walker Batman theme brought in that's just as well known and just as well fits the character, and is as often, or if not more, played in the series. So I think that it fits well that a character inspired by the Dark Knight also has her own set of theme songs here. So yeah, it fits really well. It's really a beautifully orchestrated pair of pieces. And we also get some of the Two-Face theme brought in and used, especially in the first scene. It's where he's alluded to. You hear him speak, you don't see him. He remains in the shadow initially in his first appearance, but there's this subtle theme that plays underneath of it, and then it also then kind of comes in once for part 2 the title card plays. So you get some good music there. As I mentioned, as Gordon is being arrested and taken out, and Barbara is sort of shouting out after him, very alarmed at what's happening, and Gordon shouting back that everything's going to be okay and it's going to get taken care of. There's a theme that comes in and plays as Gil sort of tries to swoop in and be the comforter to her, and her being reluctant to accept it at that point. it's the music really sets for that. And the Batman theme plays quite a bit in this also. We get Batman, as I mentioned, his ingenuity and pulling the handle off the side of the subway car as it's hanging outside of this sort of hanging precariously. The Batman theme plays, and there's a tension building in that as well. And then, of course, as Batman and Robin spring into action to sort of save Barbara on the docks, more Batman theme played there. And I think the music in the subway as Batgirl and Robin are sort of accidentally revealed, and Two-Face discovers that they're not alone, and that Batman must be the guy with the mustache. We get some more music that's fitting for that scene as well. I loved the soundtrack for this episode. I think that it's hard to nitpick or say that there's anything wrong with it. I think that even more so than that, as we often say, a lot of times the music isn't offensive, but it's not memorable. This is one, as you mentioned, you're going to have this theme probably stuck in your head, both Batgirl themes stuck in your head going forward for a few days, if you're a fan of music like we are. So I felt I had no choice but to give this episode a perfect 10 out of 10 for music.
Love it. Yeah, I perhaps unsurprisingly gave it the exact same score of 10 out of 10. It's great. There's so many great tracks, and the one thing that really stuck out to me, and it's because it does feel a bit out of place to me, not enough to bring my score down, obviously, but it's when it's revealed that when Batgirl is sort of tripped and falls into Robin, and the smoke bomb goes off, and Batman, as he's still in his Magic Malone outfit, yells, "Look out, Robin," and dives underneath or dives down onto the tracks and kind of hides underneath the side platform there. And Two-Face kind of has this realization that, oh, if that's Robin, then this must be. And then like this really like funky jazz, like this bass line comes in, and all of a sudden we're like do, and it's like real funky for like just that scene, and we get like these really like jazzy horns brought in as just for that kind of one scene. I mean, I think it's fine because it does have that sort of mafia hit has been put out. We're about to, this guy's being fitted for cement shoes type of motif to it. So I think it kind of fits with what the scene is, but we don't really get music like that for the rest of the episode. The rest of the episode is just mostly strings and horns, but we just get this really like funky bass line comes in all of a sudden, and these like this real fast percussion and these horns brought in just for that one scene. And that stuck out to me as kind of, it almost kind of made me laugh the first time I heard it, but it's all great, and it's all pretty unique. And if anything, that maybe just again signals that two different composers worked on this episode. So there's a little bit of a difference. Each part within itself kind of has its own unique flavor to it, which I think just makes the music for both parts more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, and that is going to be our voice acting. We have a lot of returning voices for this week's episode, and I think a lot of great performances to talk about. So let's discuss this week's voice acting.
Yeah, that's right. We have, of course, John Vernon briefly returning as Rupert Thorne, and I'm trying to think, is this his last appearance until Mystery of the Batwoman?
No, he's in Bane.
Oh, you're right. Okay. So
yeah, I think he's definitely in Bane, and maybe in another episode. I'm not sure, but either way, I think his performance in this, albeit a very, very small performance, I love the fact that he's playing this cowardly mob boss that's attempting to run away from the police. First of all, dude, if you can't be seen there, why are you there at all? Like that's the question that gets me. On the off chance that you're busted, why, if you can't be there, why are you there at all? Why are you the mob boss there at the scene? But regardless,
why are only two guys unloading this giant shipment of quote unquote contraband?
Good question. All good questions here. But as he escapes and Batman, of course, is foils his escape plan, we get this great scene where Bullock and Gordon and Gil Mason come up to the roof and are calling out for him, and they say, "Come out with your hands up," and he shouts back, "Not even if I could, Flatfoot," which is great because they get up and see him hanging all tied up, and Gordon with a great line, "Don't you just love it when he gift wrapped them for you?" So good.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a lot of fun and a fun little cameo, even though he's not really the focus of the episode, to see that character thrown in there. But elsewhere in the episode, we of course briefly, mostly in there, I'd say only in part one, but we do have Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred. Like I said, I like some of that dialogue that he and Lauren Lester as Robin get to kind of bounce off each other as they're sort of with Bruce out in the field, are sort of left to puzzle this one out together. And so I liked the little bit of back and forth that they had as and then as Robin suits up after realizing what's up with Mason and sort of rides off into the city on the motorcycle. I think they have a couple fun scenes there together. And speaking of Lauren Lester, he gets quite a bit to do here. He both in part one, like we said, he just kind of shows up and he at first kind of seems like Batman's putting him on the sidelines, a recurring theme from previous episodes. And then Bruce sort of comes up with the idea to have him make this appearance and it sort of let him be the one. Batman and Batgirl don't honestly have that much interaction in this episode. There's obviously a little bit later on in the subway and in part two, but it really Robin actually gets quite a bit to do and is sort of the one that both is both sort of exasperated by her at some points and is trying to get her to just to leave it alone and go home and let him do his job. But at the same time, he sort of, in that moment, I think especially it's the sort of the twist comes when she saves him in the subway as he's almost washed away, and then kind of from there it seems like he's sort of way more accepting of her. So you get a nice like little mini arc for the beginning of that relationship there. So I think Lauren Lester does a pretty good job here.
Yeah, I think it's great. He has a little, it seems like he's headed for another episode full of quips. He does get one or two in, and he does have mention an all-time favorite line of mine, how he hates wet shoes. I still repeat that one anytime my own shoes get wet. So memorable there. But yeah, I love the fact, again, as you already mentioned, that he gets a little bit of the starring role for this. Batman is sort of relegated to the back. It sets up the budding romance between Barbara and Dick, albeit they're sort of unaware that it's the other person there in the flesh with them, but it does set up the future romance between the two of them and more interactions down the road between the pair of them. So although we know that goes nowhere, but spoiler alert. But I digress. Yeah, I think the fact that he gets some more serious lines. This is a couple episodes in a row now, I think, where we've featured him not just being the straight up annoying quip machine that he was so early on in the series. So fleshing him out, allowing him to be a character that is there, quite frankly, to rescue Batman after Batman has gotten himself captured is pretty great. So his performance, I feel like, matches the fact that they treated the character with a little bit more respect in this episode.
Yeah, for sure. That's a fun dynamic that we'll get to. And yeah, some of our other sort of side characters, it's funny, he only has a few lines across these two parts, but Robert Costanza as Bullock is so freaking funny in these two episodes. Like, everything he says is pretty funny, from the first interaction he has with Barbara, where he's letting her know that there's going to be this rally, and she's telling him what a great idea it is, and he has to sort of sheepishly admit that it wasn't his idea. And then when he's talking to after Batgirl has been revealed, and we get a great shot that as he's sort of crumpling up the newspaper with Batgirl's picture on it to reveal that Barbara is sitting in front of him, and he asks, what's next, Weasel Woman? And then that bit in part two, as he's sort of just sitting next to Gordon's cell, just gorging on food as Gordon is talking about how much he hates the prison food, and then his sort of overly angry reaction to when the reporters are throwing the microphones in his face. But even though, I guess, I mean, you wouldn't say, I think even though he's a bit player here, and certainly him, I think him playing off of Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon, who, despite being sort of the center of this episode, is sort of sidelined for a lot of it. But I think Robert Costanza and Bob Hastings both do a good job in sort of limited screen time.
Yeah, I think especially at the end, Bob Hastings' interaction with Barbara and mentioning to the media that he's glad that Batgirl is here and that she's welcome. And again, his sort of outrage at the beginning as he has this interaction with Gil Mason as he's being arrested. I think all of that. And then ultimately, as they're on the docks and he threatens Gil's life after Gil mentions that sort of very creepily that he's going to cozy up to Barbara after Jim is gone. And it's quite irritating to Jim, rightfully so. He's quite upset about that.
It's business, Jim, nothing personal. Matter of fact, I respect you. I do. But a fella has to take his opportunities where he finds them. And with you out of the way, I'll be mayor inside of a year.
You're sick, Gil. A lot sicker than him. At least I can see his bad half.
Sorry you feel that way. At least you won't have to worry about Barbara. I'll take good care of her. She's very fond of me, you know.
You piece of scum. I may not be around to stop you, but I know someone who will.
I wouldn't count on it, Jim. There's been a recent decline in the bat population.
So he gets to show some emotion, and as you said, Robert Costanza, I think, as Bullock, no surprise that even in the small bit parts that he has to do is really strong and gives a great performance.
Absolutely. And that brings us to some of our bigger actors of the piece, our villains. First and foremost, we have Richard Mull returning as Two-Face. And it's interesting because in part one, he's kind of in the shadows for most of it. He doesn't have very many lines, but it's very clearly Richard Mull's Two-Face. So I'm not quite sure why they bothered with that, with that moment in the story. But he does get to be, that's probably the best stuff from him in this episode, is because he is, even though he's the main villain and the guy that's sort of trying to muscle in on the underworld's territory, it's not really his episode. It's he does get that very good scene towards the end of part one as he's sort of threatening Matches Malone and sort of looking over him and talking about how there's just something that doesn't sit right with him about him, but that ultimately it's not up to him to decide, and that it's going to be the coin, of course. And then that and probably his interaction when Mr. Tim Matheson, who folks would know from the West Wing, probably most famously played the vice president on that show, as Gil Mason. Probably the best interaction that Richard Mull gets is when Mason calls him Harvey while they're in the subway, and that's probably the best moment for Two-Face here.
Yeah, he grabs him by the lapels and shakes him out and lets him know that that's not acceptable. He's not Harvey anymore. That at least that Gil doesn't get to call him that, which I appreciated. So yeah, kind of setting up that regardless that he needs to acknowledge Two-Face as the head of this ring, that he's not getting too big for his own britches at this point. But I feel like that both of their performances, as you mentioned, Richard Mull's is very limited, but I think more or less maybe just looking at this as it's a children's cartoon, so you're going to give the kids an opportunity to go, oh my gosh, it's Two-Face, without actually revealing it to them, maybe subtly doing that, or maybe if this is the first time you've ever watched an episode, not knowing who the character is by their voice, maybe. I don't know, but yeah, it's pretty spot on right away that you know who the villain is because of the the voice acting. So and then for his role as Mr. Mason, I think that he does a great job, and he's the slimy secret villain for the episode. Essentially, most of the heroes are unaware of his guilt until midway through the second part. So, him having to play sort of a good guy and this slimy, smarmy politician angling for Gordon's spot, but still having to keep up appearances and pretend like he's supporting Gordon. I think he does a solid job at doing that. So him going on to then play another politician on a live action television series, does that mean he's typecast now? He's automatically has to be a politician, a smarmy politician in every series?
Could be, yeah. I'll be honest, I didn't love Mr. Matheson's turn as Gil Mason. I think there are moments where he's good. I think it works in the first part of the episode, like when he's there to arrest Gordon. I think he's good in that scene. But when the turn is sort of official and it's sort of the mask off moment in part 2, I didn't think there was enough of a shift in the performance where it really feels like this guy's like this real sleazeball. To your point, maybe that's because he is playing this sort of, affable, clean-cut politician. And so even when he's saying these dirty, terrible things and he's talking about how he's gonna, off Jim Gordon and take his daughter, afterwards and all this stuff, that I think maybe I was expecting or perhaps misremembering a more sinister turn there. So not bad by any means, but maybe not as great as I had remembered it. And when the mask is pulled off literally at the end, when he unmasks Batgirl and sees that it's Barbara, I didn't really buy the shock there as he's sort of that reveal's made to him. But that's more nitpicking. Like I said, I think he does a solid job otherwise. But that will bring us to our last couple of voice actors here. We of course have Kevin Conroy as Batman, who again does not get a ton to do in these 2 episodes. He does get a little bit, and he gets probably a little bit more to do in part 1 as he's first sort of reacting to these news reports. And then when he has the scene, as you mentioned, where he goes and he talks to Gordon via the radio that he kind of shoots into Gordon's cell, and they have a conversation. And then maybe his best moment comes when he goes to see Barbara and is sort of trying to very authoritatively tell her to stay out of it. That might be the best moment for Kevin Conroy in this episode.
Yeah, it's a limited role for the majority of the episode. As we said, he does have a little bit of time as Matches Malone, which is welcome. But it's clearly just Kevin. It's just Kevin Conroy doing a different voice. Imagine that. But yeah, it's not asked of a whole lot. I think that again, I think his most poignant and best delivered line is when he talks about Barbara being out, or Batgirl being out there on her own. It sort of punctuates that scene very well. But the rest of it, he's not asked to do much. Although I would say the interaction between him and Barbara also, where she's sort of pleading with him to arrive at the rally, and him again being very standoffish and letting, kind of a jerk, because he, hey, this isn't, it's not my job to make public appearances, which he's right. But also Jim Gordon being his only friend in Gotham, you would think that would lend a little bit more, at least somewhat compassion or empathy in that moment than he shows. Although ultimately he makes up for it by sending Robin in his stead. But yeah, I think it's not an episode for him to have to carry, and I think that ultimately that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I do really like that scene in the cave as he's sort of getting into the Matches Malone get up, and he and Robin are sort of arguing over it, and Robin's sort of telling him that he doesn't want to be sidelined and left sitting around at the manor while Bruce hits the streets and stuff, and that's sort of a good little act break there as he asks Robin if since he's not going into the field with Bruce, if he's available for public appearances. I think that's a fun little bit there. And then, yeah, obviously our main actress that we're going to be talking about for this episode is the returning Melissa Gilbert, who we've talked about a couple of times, as we mentioned, appearing in both Heart of Steel as well as I Am the Night before this. And again, she kind of has her grand entrance here, where she finally gets to be sort of the main character, because we do follow Barbara for most of this episode. So it's fun to see this, and I think she does a really great job. Like it's weird because I think she and Tara Strong, who of course voices her in the new Batman Adventures, even going forward into Beyond when she's played, by Stockard Channing and, an older woman, obviously. There's a lot of varying Barbara Gordon voices, even within this DC animated universe. But I don't know if this is a hot take or not, and she obviously didn't get as many cracks at it as Tara Strong did, but I think I like Melissa Gilbert's voice a little bit better. Like to me, it's just like when she's having those interactions with her father at the beginning of part 1, and then having those interactions with Batman, and she's sort of, she sort of has an exterior monologue. In a comic book, it would be, thought balloons or whatever. But like, I think she does it. She kind of almost is narrating the episode. And I think she does a great job.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the switch to Tara Strong, I never quite heard the story as to why they went with a different casting choice, whether it was availability or they just preferred to have somebody else take on the role. Whatever it was, though, I always felt like, and it's nothing against Tara Strong, she's obviously an extremely talented voice actress that has been around and done numerous voices, so she's very talented. But I would agree with you. I think hashtag my Batgirl would be given to Melissa Gilbert if somebody put a gun to my head and told me to choose one. I don't know why they would put a gun to my head and ask me to choose the hashtag Batgirl, but I digress. Point being, she was always my favorite Batgirl voice. I think the change was okay, when you went to Tara Strong, but wouldn't have been ideal, wouldn't have been my choice to do it. And I think that this episode, I think when she's talking with Whoopi and she has, as you mentioned, the external monologue that she chooses to do to sort of narrate and keep the viewer engaged. She does that all really well. I think the emotion that she has to show when they've taken her dad away and she's worried about him, and then again expressing frustration with Batman not wanting to sign on to her plan to show up to the rally, having to take things into her own hands, and that line ending that first episode, let's see what Batgirl can do, I think is just one of the most iconic lines delivered probably throughout the run of this show, because it punctuates, it's everything together. It's the music, it's the visuals, it's the reveal of the suit, it's her delivering the line. But without that delivery of that line, I think you're missing something, and it adds a lot to it.
So Batman can't help me? Fine. In that case, let's see what Batgirl can do.
So her performance, coupled with everybody else that we've already talked about, just so strong. And she has a lot to do. She has a lot to carry in this episode, as we mentioned. She doesn't really get to play off of Kevin Conroy a whole lot. She gets some Bob Hastings. She gets some of the later interactions with Robin. We get that's pretty much it, though. A lot of it is her talking to herself and her talking brief interactions with people here and there. But ultimately, I think it's a great performance on her part, and I felt like I had no choice but to give voice acting a 10 out of 10.
Love it. Yeah, I went one tick lower. I went 9 out of 10. Like I said, I was not a huge fan of Tim Matheson as the Gil Mason character, but still just a phenomenal job from Melissa Gilbert, as we've been talking about, and from the rest of the supporting cast. A great job, and everyone plays their roles pretty darn well. So a great voice cast this week.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for this week. Totaling everything up, I end up with a very strong, and ending up in our top picks section, 38 out of 40. What about you?
And yes, adding everything up for my final score, I have a final score of 36 out of 40. So not a big difference there. And with your 38, Cal, that will, of course, put these this two-part episode into our top picks section. So this one is in quite rarefied air here.
So do we even need to discuss if this is a must watch? I think this, based on score alone, that tells people that this is a must watch. But pivotal to the series, it introduced Batgirl. You get the culmination, sort of the Barbara Gordon storyline that was started in Heart of Steel, and continued on in I Am the Night. And so you really have the culmination of that character here sort of reaching their zenith. We do get, of course, a follow-up episode in Batgirl Returns, which is another great episode that I look forward to covering with you in the future. But yeah, I say there's probably no real argument here that this is one of the pivotal episodes and seminal ones that you kind of have to watch when you're watching through Batman animated series, right?
100%. I think even if you don't include the new Batman adventures in this conversation, you just talk about these 80 some original episodes, I still think it's an easy must watch because of this little arc that Barbara Gordon's been on, and that it all sort of culminates here. Plus, it's an interesting story anyway, but obviously introducing Batgirl, who does come back in one more episode in the original run here. No question at all. It's a great episode anyway. It's a great story, and then on top of that, it's pivotal. If anything, this is like 3 thumbs up, because it's important to the series itself. It's important to the DCAU as a whole, and it's just a great episode all around. So that's 3 thumbs up somehow out of 2.
a new score for us. 3 thumbs up. I like that. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and giving us a listen. Don't forget, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. You know which ones they're on by now if you've listened before, and you're probably listening on one now to consume the episode. So subscribe to us, and you'll get each episode delivered, including our bonus episodes, which we just dropped a pair of them last weekend. So give those a listen if you're interested, following along with Batman: The Adventures Continue and Justice League Infinity, both ongoing comic series. Here our thoughts and commentary on both of those series in our bonus episodes. Liam, we are continuing as we go through the month of October here with more Batman the Animated Series. People would know exactly what episode we're going to be covering next if they followed us on social media at DCAU Review, as mentioned on Twitter and Instagram. So Liam, why don't we let the good listeners know that haven't checked us out and don't follow us what episode we'll be covering next week?
That is right. We'll be picking up the very next episode in production order, which of course will be another Penguin episode. We will be talking about Blind as a Bat next week. It's a very, very Penguin heavy month, and another very memorable episode as we see how exactly Batman can go into the field when he has his sight taken away from him.
Yeah, another one that I remember seeing an awful lot growing up. So it'll be interesting to see how this one holds up. Don't forget, also, if you're looking to support the podcast, there is a link at the bottom of the podcast on all listening platforms that you can click on if you wish to send us a few dollars just to keep us motivated and going here. We appreciate it. We invest a lot of time in doing the podcast, so we would thank you. You can also pick up a hat, shirt, or sticker via the shop page. Head over to DCAUreview.com and click on the shop. As we mentioned already, subscribe to us and follow us on social media. You can also listen to every episode, both past and present, on the Pod Tower YouTube page. Just head over to YouTube, search for the Pod Tower, subscribe to us there, and not only will you get content from us, but from our friends at Watchtower Database and Tim Talk, who just recently restarted their reviews. They're continuing through Justice League Unlimited. I know they're wrapping up their Cadmus story arc there, so lots of good stuff happening there. Liam, I'm looking forward to reviewing more Batman next week, but until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.